think every single person on this planet needs to be educated and re-educated about climate change. We are dedicated as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to embrace this education issue.
We can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
State Congress voted to ban abortion. Alternate universe located.
Global temperatures rise.
The effects on social media on Generation Z.
To avoid catastrophe, rising sea levels, and dying coral reefs, the epicenter of a global pandemic.
No exception for rape or incest.
Hello and welcome to the COP30 Climate Hub, broadcasting live from Belém, Brazil. The global internet is extremely unstable today, so if there is an interruption, just check back on our website. We're recording everything, and everything is uploaded as soon as the net becomes stable again. So we have a very interesting day ahead of us. But Nick, first let us tell us a bit about what's happening in the negotiations.
Yeah, well, maybe not so much the negotiations, but maybe things that are actually being discussed here, because it is the last week. And I thought that what Simon Steele said yesterday, who's the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, he said since 2001, the investments in renewable energy worldwide has tripled to $2.2 trillion. Well, that's a number we kind of have heard of. But what I didn't realize was that he also said that's more than the GDP or the economies of over 180 countries. And this shows how big it is getting with the fossil fuels. I think another key thing is we're all watching for the end of this COP to see how the government's going to handle the thorny issue of how to get off fossil fuels and whether they will come up with individual plans for that. But it's moving. So the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we've focused on several times, now has another national member, and that's the government of Cambodia. So they're now the 18th nation state to join this block of countries participating in this treaty, getting rid of fossil fuels. It's quite interesting right now.
Indeed it is. And the fossil fuels, of course, they're present in all the discussions and also hopefully in depth in the negotiations too. And and this past weekend, there was even a fossil fuel funeral out in the streets in Belém. And we have a video of this.
Hey, hey, COP30, stop with the dirty. Hey, hey, COP30, stop with the dirty. Hey, hey, COP30.
We're here because we literally can't afford another business as usual COP. The fossil fuel industry and their political backers that stalk the halls of COPs year after year have brought us to the edge of climate disaster. And we're here to say enough. The vast majority of not just people around the world, but governments around the world, they do want serious climate action. It's hard. President Trump's not here in person, but we know that his representatives are. They're going around threatening people with sanctions, with all kinds of recriminations. But the reality is that the fossil fuel industry is in a fight for its life because the renewables are so much cheaper now, and it's an obvious, clean, cheaper way for the world to go. time like this, we need leadership, and leadership comes in many forms. It comes from the governments here standing up to the fossil fuel industry and saying enough.
Deputados na nossa Constituição de 88 estão aqui para chorar no funeral dos combustíveis fósseis.
But it comes from every single one of us. Whenever there's a storm, a climate disaster, we need to raise our voices and point the finger at who's responsible, which is the fossil fuel industry. It's the big oil and gas corporations who've made $2.8 billion in profit every single day for 50 years. And they've known all of that time that they were burning our planet. We need to start saying it, and we need to hold them accountable. We need to raise taxes on them, we need to sue them, we need to get them to pay for these climate disasters. We have a world now of young people who, quite rightly, they're scared. They're scared about climate disaster. They see it on their tellies, they see it all around them, they see it every day. It feels very real to young people, but to everybody, to older people. The mask has fallen, I think, from the face of the fossil fuel industry and their big backers, but also people see the impact. So that conversation is alive, it is happening. The conversation we really need is how do we get from here to a just, safe future? How do we do that in a way that is good for the vast majority of people, for the 99%, not the small number of big, giant corporations and their political and economic backers who are destroying our planet.
We mean business, so we talk about electrification. Then I speak to the Asian Development Bank about the future of COPs. And then I have, so as a diplomat, I love the left, I love the right. I just try to see how can I work with them best. So the left is wonderful to have social focused ambitions and all those kind of things, but the right is very good in implementation. So we moved in the Netherlands with a very clear climate ambition, and we're now moving in implementation, and with the right-wing government, I could sell it by saying we need energy security, we need, which is often renewable energy, we need water security, and the Netherlands is very good in water management globally, so we can make money on this as well. We can work on transport. We're a massive transport hub, and we need sustainable fuels, alternative fuels as well, and that will make us more resilient. And lastly, we are important in food systems. We're the third exporter of food in the world because we're a trade hub. So also that needs to be sustainable globally, that these food systems keep working. And that's good for feeding the world, feeding us, but also for transport and for our position as a hub. So suddenly the right thinks, well, this is a great story. I want you to continue on this. So I noticed that the left set the standards and has the social aspect of it, and the right has many solutions to come forward. So as a diplomat, bringing these two together brings us forward.
I think people feel despair when they feel they don't have a role in it. And one of the things we're doing here is to say that everybody has a role. The leaders inside, the governments, but also everybody around the world. We can all use our voice. We're in a digital age. We can all get onto social media. We can talk to our friends and family. We can build power from below. And there is hope. There's a huge amount of work being done at subnational level with mayors, with governors, with communities across the world. There is real progress happening. We are getting a huge transfer to renewable energy, huge amounts of investment in clean energy, in public transport based on electric transport. There's loads happening. That's where the hope lies.
I've been joined by Ingmar Rentzhog, who is the CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time. Inga, I just called you Inga. Ingmar, let me say that. 5 years ago at COP26 in Glasgow, We Don't Have Time teamed up with the United Nations Development Programme to make a big push to get the phase out of fossil fuels on the table. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so really weirdly, we need to remember this, that in in COP26 Glasgow, that was the first COP where the fossil fuel was mentioned in the negotiations for the first time. It was number 26. It didn't happen during Paris, but it did happen in Glasgow. And it's a little bit like we're having this, we're talking about the problem without talking about the real problem for so many years. And I mean, now the discussion have moved forward. We have, we're now talking openly about phasing out fossil fuel, but that was not really the case in Glasgow. So we did something special in Glasgow. We wanted to address the absurdity that there was a meeting discussing on how to finance adaptation and the climate finance, where on the same time governments were paying fossil fuel for subsidies. So we had a big count up starting at COP26, and we have it still on. So I want to start with showcasing a short clip from COP26, and you will see for yourself.
Tell them what they do so that they will be encouraged to do more. And together with the community or users, we share this to millions of people on social media, so this is getting noticed.
Let's bring in Shweta Chakrabarty tonight, risk and behavioral scientist and president of U.S. operations for We Don't Have Time.
As the name says, we don't have time.
ستوكهولم مؤسس منظمة ليس لدينا الوقت. We don't have time. السيد إنغمار رونسبورغ.
Joining us for more as We Don't Have Time's Nick Nuttall. Nick, welcome to the program.
And Nick, about this counter, speaking of numbers.
This is a clock that shows you how much money has been spent on fossil fuel subsidies since the beginning of the COP.
We have a climate crisis and we're still subsidizing the industry which is causing the crisis. I mean, it's completely dumb. I'm a finance guy, it makes no sense whatsoever.
$2.5 trillion went into subsidies for fossil fuel. That's a definition of insanity.
Still, this is a positive. It's the first COP decision that actually mentions coal power or fossil fuel subsidies.
We need to communicate climate action, because if only a few people or a few companies are doing climate action without communicating it to others, we will not solve the climate crisis. So it was really amazing to see. We had this big counter counting up, and all the speakers we had on stage, we had ministers, we had policymakers, people that were actually involved in the negotiations. They couldn't avoid it. It was like, what are we doing here if we continue with the fossil fuel subsidies? And I'm really glad that we at least had it mentioned in the agreement at the end of that meeting. The board agreed to phase down inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, it has, at least is something. And now many people are aware about the subsidies. That was not the case before COP26. We have let this counter, though, continue to counting since COP26. And I think we have it on the screen here. And this is where we are now. It's $23 trillion in fossil fuel subsidies since COP26. It's actually a higher number because we had the pace programmed into this counter in 2021. It was $11 million per minute. I think it's more like $14 or $15 million per minute today. So it's actually the pace is accelerating, exactly like the climate crisis is accelerating. This is total insanity. And what people don't know is that if we just redirect those subsidies into the clean solutions instead, the fossil fuel industry will be unprofitable and the clean energy industry will be super profitable. So it's so easy to just redirect the money. But we're not only needing to redirect the subsidies now, we really need to have a phase-out plan for oil. And that's why I'm so glad that at COP28, there were a breaking point. For the first time, countries started to talk about this. It was actually in the negotiations. We didn't get the word fossil fuel phase out. We did kind of transition away from fossil fuel. But I mean, come on, that's also the thing we want. So the narrative really changed in Dubai. And I think we have a short film showing what we did there as well.
We cannot leave this COP without a big deal on fossil fuel phase out.
This is the scientific message of the need for a phase out of all fossil fuels.
It has to stop.
This COP can actually move us forward in the narrative that we can't ignore the elephant in the room anymore. Because you can't ignore to have a discussion about oil when you have a COP meeting in an oil country.
We're at a absolutely critical moment.
If we waste this, as you said, there is no time.
If we get the term fossil fuels in the negotiated outcome, and whether it's transition away or phase out, that'll be historic.
The fossil fuel industry and major fossil fuel producing nations have been derailing climate action since the beginning of UN climate talks.
They have distorted this process, the COP process, to such an extent that even talking about phasing out fossil fuels is so controversial.
OPEC nations are among those pushing hardest against a global agreement to end the use of fossil fuels.
The Saudi delegation has rejected any dialogue related to fossil fuels.
And it must be very, very, very punishingly tiring right now.
I think it's crunch time, and you can really feel it in the air.
The draft agreement emerged with no mention of phasing out fossil fuels.
We will not sign our gift certificate.
We can still do this. It's not too late.
Delegates, colleagues, and friends, I must say that you did it. You delivered.
Negotiators worked through the night on the deal, which for the first time ever calls for transitioning away from fossil fuels.
This is a sea change moment.
I think this is a global turning point.
It has changed the narrative forever, and fossil fuel are now toxic as hell.
Whilst we didn't turn the page on the fossil fuel era in Dubai, this outcome is the beginning of the end.
So that was COP28. At COP29, this talking point kind of disappeared. I mean, the delegates from oil countries, they were very glad that they don't need to talk as much as fossil fuel anymore. But here in Belém, the discussion is back more than ever. And it's not only talk this time, it's also happening things. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty are getting traction. And regardless how this meeting ends, they will have another meeting in April next year with the host country, Colombia, an oil exporting country that will host the very first conference about transition away from fossil fuel. It will be not with the 200 countries. It will be with 80 nations that have signed up. Cambodia signed up yesterday. It's now 3 oil countries in that coalition. And on a wider note, it's more than 60 countries supporting a phase out of fossil fuel at this meeting. So let's see what's happening here, but don't give up. We will do it in Colombia if it's not happening here. And lastly, the number you see on the screen is very depressing. But since COP26, investment in clean energy has tripled from $750 billion per year to $2 trillion. Let's continue on that path and we will make it.
Quite right, King Ma. That's very good. Thank you very much indeed, Ingmar.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce Fernanda de Carvalho. She's Global Climate and Energy Policy Lead at WWF. So Fernanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss something so important. And WWF is working on this issue because we care about all living things on Earth. So the first slide shows exactly how climate change affects all living things on Earth. The top part of the graphic was in the IPCC report of 2023, the 6th assessment report. And you can see how climate change affects people's lives. So people born in 2020, for example, they will be facing 5 degrees world and the impacts that come with that. So WWF did the same graphic for species. And if you see, for example, turtles hatched in 1930, when they will be 100 years old, and that's a long-lived species, climate change will affect them very much. And I think the most compelling example there is corals, because in all warming scenarios, we're going to either lose all corals or have very little of the coral reefs that are so much needed for the oceans, the biggest carbon sink that we have. So yeah, we are crossing a tipping point, and science has been very clear on that. My next slide is the rationale behind why we discuss so much the link between fossil fuels and biodiversity. Climate change leads to biodiversity loss, and it's a vicious cycle. The temperature rise, extreme weather, sea level rise, and ecosystem disruption that are caused by climate change affects biodiversity. And also biodiversity loss causes climate change. Carbon sinks such as forests and oceans that I already mentioned are becoming weaker in their capacity to store carbon, according to the IPCC report that I mentioned, the assessment report, the sixth one. And this is very bad. So sorry about that. It's the next one. This is another picture of this feedback loop and this cycle that we are discussing here. Climate change being a threat to nature, nature loss amplifying global warming. So we should look at nature as a powerful ally in the fight against climate change. People must safeguard and restore nature. We must avoid human activities or control and regulate human activities that drive nature loss to avoid climate change and the global warming that's caused by fossil fuels and destroying and causing impacts to people and nature. So next slide is, so why is WWF concerned about this? Because our mission is to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment, build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature by conserving the world's biological diversity, the use of renewable natural resources, making it sustainable, and of course, reducing pollution and wasteful consumption. So going back to fossil fuels, what the science tells us is that fossil fuels are driving climate change and biodiversity loss. And I think I already explained that. Climate change is mentioned in the IPBES report, the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, as the third cause of biodiversity loss, and it also enhances the other causes. The first cause is, of course, land use change, and the second cause is the direct exploitation of species, and they get exacerbated by climate change. And there are studies, a recent study published in Nature in 2025, that states that by mid-century, 2050, climate change can become the leading cause of biodiversity loss. And the IPCC states in its turn that fossil fuels are the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, which are 75%. Fossil fuels are responsible for 75% of such emissions that since 1990 have been enhanced by 54%, and since 2029 by 12%. So we're not in a good position. And of course, there are licenses of gas and oil and gas licenses still being issued. So again, I highlight that the IPBES has highlighted climate change as a key driver of ecosystem collapse. The world is still planning fossil fuel expansion beyond 1.5C targets. And this is what is in discussion in this COP. We are very much connected to keeping 1.5 alive. This is the ultimate objective of the Paris Agreement, and that's what we are discussing here. And that would entail no new oil and gas fields. and also because fossil fuels have direct and indirect impacts on biodiversity. So, direct impacts, as I already mentioned a few, are habitat destruction, pollution, noise disturbances, deforestation for infrastructure, oil spills, damage from drill cutting and drilling mud, and of course the indirect impacts, the ones that are harder to see, is contributing to sea level rise, habitat shifts, introducing invasive species, altered precipitation patterns, more frequent and intense extreme weather events, acidification, changes in aquatic environments, and of course, social impacts on local human populations. And we think science should and advance on what the impacts of fossil fuels on biodiversity are. Those are very serious and we need to address them. So this is what we tried to do this year that I'm going to go over a little bit. We proposed a motion to the IUCN World Conservation Congress to address the climate and biodiversity side through fossil fuel supply side measures and a just transition. Those words are very, very common in this space that we are here. There is a just transition work program that we are trying to develop in this COP. And this motion addresses the IUCN to develop an analysis to support the relevance, important, and complementarity of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. We think a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty could be a complementary instrument to deliver on the changes that we need to see in fossil fuel supply side, because when you come to the UNFCCC, of course, it has limits. It has to deal with much more things than just, fossil fuel phase out, although that's crucial. And we are not going to address climate change without that. And a fossil fuel treaty is also a way to bring this discussion to the whole of society. So it has a complementary role. And it's the first time that the IUCN, in adopting this motion, is addressing the very important issue of fossil fuel impacts on biodiversity. So the IUCN will have a say on this through the conclusions of those analyses. So that's why this is so important. This motion also asks states to provide guidance on just transition pathways for fossil fuel dependent developing states, because we want to change the development path highly based on fossil fuels that those states could come through. And we also encourage states to address the gap in international governance on fossil fuels. As I mentioned, we talk very much about demand, but supply is still not addressed through a variety of international instruments, including a potential fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. We also declare a fossil fuel free zone in the Amazonian states. This motion was proposed by WWF with partners, of course, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. We have partners from the US, from Tanzania, from the Global South, Tunisia, the Center for Biological Diversity, partners in Sweden and in Bangladesh, and in Guatemala. So it was a fantastic experience to have all those partners fighting to get fossil fuels through to the attention of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is a very important multilateral forum for this discussion. So I think it created a great opportunity, and it's really strong language, even stronger than the UNFCCC. The key takeaways that we have for this discussion and for this exercise of getting this motion discussed and approved by the IUCN. First of all, it was approved by at least 105 countries and 80 organizations that are members of the IUCN, including NGOs, indigenous organizations, etc. So those are the messages that I want to leave with you, and I hope I made through in my presentation, is that fossil fuel phase out is essential to biodiversity protection. We are not going to be able to protect nature if we don't address the very cause of climate change that is also causing biodiversity loss. So it's very, very important to have policies addressing fossil fuels and a fossil fuel roadmap coming out of this conference to build on the commitment of the UNFCCC in 2023 to transition away from fossil fuels. So the next step should be a roadmap coming out of this Congress. So climate change will be the top driver of biodiversity loss by mid-century. So that's why it's even more important to address climate change with the urgency that science has already stated, that we are on a point where we will overshoot 1.5 and there will be impacts. So we should strive to come back to 1.5 as soon as possible. And the obvious way to do that is addressing fossil fuels, which is 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Fossil fuel supply side action is overdue, and that's what we are trying to call the attention of people to. Only working on the demand side won't do the trick, so fossil fuel supply side action is key and very necessary. And this motion that now becomes a resolution of the IUCN is a crucial step for aligning climate and biodiversity agendas. We talk so much about synergies and building positive synergies between those two agendas, but we do need to address the negative synergies too that I just showed you. You know, fossil fuels are increasing biodiversity loss, and biodiversity loss is also contributing to enhance climate change. We really need to break that feedback loop somehow. And of course, the IUCN engagement in addressing a root cause of biodiversity loss is what we ultimately want to achieve through this motion that became a resolution. So when we present on this, many people have asked us how they can engage and how they can participate. So we call on organizations, civil society organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, science, academia, to please engage with the IUCN environmental law and climate change commissions, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that will be doing this analysis and discussing the importance and complementarity of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to the UNFCCC. And we want to see this agenda advancing at the COP. I think I finished with this message, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Fernanda. That was a very in-depth and enlightening discussion. So please take a seat and we'll continue with the panel. Thank you.
I think every single person on this planet needs to be educated and re-educated about climate change. We are dedicated as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to embrace this education issue.
We can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally say, tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
State Congress voted to ban abortion. Alternate universe located.
Global temperatures rise.
The effects on social media on Generation Z.
To avoid catastrophe, rising sea levels, and dying coral reefs, the epicenter of a global pandemic.
No exception for rape or incest.
And we're back, and I have two new guests in the studio, in addition to Fernanda, you just gave your fantastic keynote. And next to Fernanda is Gavin Edwards. You are Executive Director, Nature Positive Initiative. Terrific to have you with us, Gavin.
Thanks, Katerina.
And next to you is Maite Mompó. You're Spanish Language Director, Stop Ecocide International. Terrific to have you too.
Thank you.
And we will hopefully be joined by a third guest that might be running a little bit late. So we'll get back to that. So Maite, you heard Fernanda's keynote on the IUCN statement. There is a legal perspective to this, of course, with the IGC, the International Court of Justice advisory from this summer. So please give us your view on the legal aspects here.
Yeah, there are important improvements in the legal aspects. We are in the path of getting Ecocide an international crime. At the same time, this motion she was talking about at the IUCN Congress, a motion 061 recognizing Ecocide as a crime to protect nature was also passed. And that's really important because a majority of states and governmental agencies voted in favor, and also a vast majority of NGOs and indigenous people's organizations. That means that we have the support now of not only the civil society, but also the governments. So we are getting many people on board this movement, global movement, to get Ecocide recognized as an international crime. And this is our final objective, to have this crime recognized as the 5th crime under, in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, so that we have the vast destruction of nature put at the same level ethically and legally as the worst crimes that can be committed. I mean, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. This is really, really important because it is something that now the governments are into it. It is inside the discussions of many countries in the world. And with this motion being passed in the IUCN, also we now know that there are many governments supporting us, and there are discussions in around more than 20 countries to get Ecocide recognized at national level. So that means that we are really getting it. And that's really, really important, because this is introducing a new tool, legal tool in the world scenario to protect nature at a global level. So that's really, really, really good.
So Maite, if this really happens, that this becomes the 5th statute of the International Court of Justice, what would it mean to the world? It could have huge implications, right?
It's really a shift, not only in legal aspect, but also in the consciousness, to protect nature. Because you know that one thing that penal law brings is that it changes society, it changes the way society, it makes the rules for societies to work. So if we introduce this legal accountability for the people making decisions that can provoke an ecocide, really a vast damage to nature, and then societies also look at it as something really wrong. There is a shift from something that was like accepted because you get a lot of money, from destruction nature, to get the natural resources, and then there is a shift that it is not so good, it is not nice, it is not the right thing to do, because we really need to take care of nature. We depend on nature, we are nature, but now we need this law to protect the planet, that it is not there in place yet.
Thank you for clarifying this, Maite. So Gavin, you are the Executive Director of Nature Positive Initiative. So there's also a business side to this, right? So what can you tell us about the business side of what we're talking about here?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of parts to the business side. One is the oil and gas sector. And as Fernanda laid out, there is really no future for oil, gas, and coal extraction and the businesses that are engaged with it. Those businesses need to completely transform, or they can't be part of the future. They're not consistent with the climate science. And so it's very, very hard to engage with those kinds of businesses. Now, there's a whole lot of businesses out there that are building a different kind of economy. The renewable energy sector, the electrification of transport, and these are really, really important. They're accelerating, not fast enough. In order to phase out fossil fuels, we also need the alternatives. The developing world needs more access to energy as well. The developed world needs to use less energy as well, of course, and there are plenty of industries behind that. Now, there is a nature component to this too. We need to ensure that an energy transition, an energy revolution is a nature positive one as well. And that means ensuring that when we site wind turbines and put grid infrastructure in place, that is there to help support the recovery of nature, not the destruction of nature. We have to be very careful as the wide nature community not to be a handbrake on this. We need to work with businesses so they can accelerate that energy transition quickly in a way that supports nature in the short term. Otherwise, nature won't be there in the longer term due to climate change.
So Gavin, could you share any examples of when the nature movement has really been able to collaborate with the business world, as in not being the handbrake?
Sure. So one of the things we have to do is help businesses understand how they recover nature and how to measure that as well. I've been on panels this week with the renewable energy sector, with car manufacturers who need to scale up. They need access to some critical minerals. That's uncomfortable, but it's a fact. You can't build a wind turbine without steel. There's only so far we can get with recycling. So making it easier for them to understand how they can measure the recovery of nature is one thing that we're doing in the Nature Positive Initiative. We're engaging with businesses in 32 countries. We've been testing this approach over the last few months. Next year, we'll introduce a common way to measure nature. So when a business says, I'm actually helping with the recovery of nature, there'll be an evidence base for that. And that's going to help inspire more businesses to come on board as well.
That's excellent. So Fernanda, in your statement, you talked about, of course, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. They actually rebranded themselves just recently as the Fossil Fuel Treaty, if I'm correct. So Fernanda, you also saw the video of the funeral of the fossil fuels that was taking place here out in the streets of Belém. So when you heard about Cambodia just yesterday, what were your reactions and what are your thoughts about which country that might be the next after Cambodia?
I think it's great that countries joined this initiative. WWF joined the initiative in 2023 because I think it's one of the exciting things that has happened in the world. It is innovative, it is disruptive, and it's bottom up. So it proposes a different way to get to a treaty. And, you know, with IUCN recommendations is where the plastic treaty started, the discussions on the plastic treaty started. So there is hope that this discussion will eventually be picked up in real negotiations at some point. And Cambodia is a very important country in this sense. It's good to have countries like Cambodia, Colombia, many of the islands signing up to this initiative. We are still missing the big countries, the big players on the oil and gas side. But I think this is a promising agenda. I thought that, you know, coming to this COP, we didn't have much hope on these discussions going on. And now there's a possibility that we leave this COP with a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels or some kind of decision that builds on the decision from 2023. So I think this movement is really, really important. And we should be highlighting the importance of countries to phase out fossil fuels. I mean, what Gavin said is really, really important. It's a transition. We are not, of course, calling for fossil fuels to be halted from one day to the other. We understand that this is a transition that needs to happen. So the renewable alternatives need to be in place, of course, but and also energy access as an equity measure. But we see real possibilities that this could happen, and this should happen fast if we want to keep 1.5, because that's what's going to really do the trick there.
Thank you, Fernanda. It might be a good sign that just a few days ago, the biggest party during COP was the Fossil Fuel Treaty Party. And there were 3,000 people at this party, and it was a magnificent party. So I think that might be a good indicator of the strength of this community. Actually.
Absolutely. Civil society is super engaged. Yep. That's maybe our number one ask.
Mm-hmm. And now we have a new asset in the panel. Wonderful to have you join us, Diana Anda Busianu. You are Minister of Environment for Romania. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. And it's busy days. If you're a minister, you're running around like crazy, I can imagine. So please share your reflections on your thoughts on the phasing out of fossil fuels and also the treaty, the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty that is really much on top of mind in this panel. So how does Romania look at this?
So basically, we've had the negotiations at the Environmental Council a few weeks ago, and we decided on the NDSs. We decided on the NDS, what our targets are. We came here with a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 66 to 72% until 2035. So that's the commitment that we are able to push forward in the next few years. We also take into account national contexts, because we know that the just transition is not something that is as easy for some countries as others. So when we're talking about this common goal of phasing out fossil fuels, for example, we need to take into account that this is not, and I've also said this in COP yesterday, we must take into account that this is not a competition in which some states move ahead while others stay behind, because it will not help us if there are a few winners at this, saying that, well, we accomplished all our goals and we live under a bubble. They don't live under a bubble. No country lives under a bubble. So basically, our strategy and how we look at it is that we need to understand that this is a common mission, and each state must support one another in order to achieve the targets that we want to achieve. And basically, because we understand that climate change at the core of it is a human rights issue, right? It affects the way we live. It affects the water we breathe, the air the water we drink, the air we breathe. So it's not something that we can separate from human rights. So if we're able to understand and to have a common consensus that basically we all need to fight for human rights, climate change is something that is interlinked. We cannot separate them.
Thank you, Diana. Our founder, if we don't have time, Ingmar Renskog, he spoke about the fossil fuel subsidies just before the panel. And of course, they've been increasing incrementally, explosively, exponentially on the wrong direction since we started addressing this with a counter at COP26 in Glasgow. So what are your views on the subsidies, Fernanda? Because this is a really major topic when you talk about fossil fuels, right?
Well, if we had a fossil fuel roadmap coming out of this COP, a transitioning away from fossil fuel roadmap, words matter. So transitioning away, not a fossil fuel roadmap. I think that subsidies is maybe the first thing to be addressed. There is a commitment by the G20 since 2009 to phase out harmful subsidies. So I think that, subsidies for oil and gas and any kind of fossil fuels is basically stopping to pay for the bad to support paying for the good.
You can put that money somewhere else.
Yeah, climate finance is a key issue. We need innovative sources. We need new sources because we live in a constrained world in terms of ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, which is the official name for public resources. So we need to free up resources for the good, for tackling climate change, and fossil fuel subsidies could be a source for that. So shifting subsidies is key, not only on the fossil fuel sector, but all sectors. But why not start with the fossil fuel sector?
Any other thoughts on the subsidies? Gavin?
It's easy to call out subsidies and the need to transition. It's very, very hard to move that transition. There's a lot of vested interests that love that money coming in. Some of them are represented by lobbyists here at this COP as well. And it has to be done at the national level as well. And it's not just fossil fuel for oil and gas, it's also for farming as well, fertilizer use. I was talking to someone the other day working in India with farmers. They reduced fertilizer use so that the government didn't have to subsidize fertilizers for farmers, and instead started giving money to farmers that they should have been giving to fertilizer subsidies. A great example of the transition needed, but let's not underestimate how the political economy is going to stand in the way of this.
Indeed, Gavin. So Diana, in terms of the Romanian perspective on subsidies, this is a tricky question, I can imagine.
So for us, the main question is how we get the money in order to have the transition. So, and I was part of the negotiations a few weeks ago that I mentioned before. One of the main amendments that we passed forward, and that was an amendment from Romania's side, was to have the money for the investments funds for new technology also be given not only on excellency criteria, but also on geographical balance. So for us, it was very important to ensure that the money given for transitioning to a new technology that would decrease and will actually support us to get to the goals that we want, that money will also be given to the countries that right now are dependable on fossil fuels, for example. So if we want to do that, we also need to have geographical balance. So that, from our part, that's the latest battle that we pushed forward, and I'm very happy that the European Commission understood that, and that at European level we managed to pass that amendment, which means that in the next phases of that money being addressed and being given to the countries, for the first time there are going to be countries at European level that never got that money for technology, for innovative technology, that will actually get the money starting from next year.
So Diana, which are the major challenges from the Romanian perspective? Is it heating of the homes, or is it transportation? Where do you have the most sort of fossil dependency?
This is a very complex debate, also because there needs to be a lot of data behind that. And it really depends who collects the data. We know that the conclusions are very dependent on who actually collects the data. But from a perspective of ETS2, right? Because we've had a discussion with ETS2, the directive that should be applied, the scheme for green certificates that should be applied, should have been applied since 2027 for transportation and for construction. Those two main areas actually told us in Romania, listen guys, we are not able to apply with this legislation in the next year. We need at least 1 year more to just be able to cope with this legislation. So what we've done is that we negotiated and we've postponed for 1 year the application of ETS2, making sure that our countries are actually able to deliver the obligations that are in the regulation. So I would say that given the feedback that we got, and given the mandate that I got into the negotiations regarding the transportation and the construction field, it seems like this is where some of the next challenges will lie ahead.
But there's also a lot of disappointment that the ETS was pushed until 2028 from many parts of society.
Yeah, but from my perspective, it's very important not to only have legislation that is good on paper, but to actually implement it. So countries actually need to be able to implement the legislation. If we are passing through legislation that at some point countries will not actually be able to cope with, it's going to be a great legislation on paper, but it's not. It's going to end up with a lot of penalties for the countries that are not going to be able to implement it. And that's not something that we should strive for. It's something that we should actually try to mitigate, in a sense.
Thank you. Fernanda, you're nodding.
I think this is very, very important, very, very complex, and the right incentives need to be in place. But things are happening. Something else that happened this year was the International Court of Justice highlighting the importance of 1.5 and the legal obligation to enhance NDCs, and even highlighting, for example, the need for countries to regulate the private sector in this context of climate change being an obligation that, a breach to comply with climate change obligations are human rights obligations. And they even mention issuing licenses for fossil fuel exploitation. So I think the understanding, all sectors, government sectors, legal, courts, the legal sector, if there's a legal sector, the understanding and the changes on fossil fuel are happening. Of course, this change is not going to be fast. It's a societal change that we need, but I hope the urgency that science brings to this debate can help us accelerate this movement.
Thank you, Fernanda. We have a few minutes left. So I'd like for all of you to end with a call to action. And it might be directed to the negotiators here at the COP or to somebody else. So Gavin, you go ahead.
Sure, a call to action. So my call to action is going to be to business to accelerate the energy transition and accelerate the nature positive economy. Eventually, we need to bring nature onto the balance sheet of every company. So every company is revealing its impacts on nature and how it is going to address those impacts for the recovery of nature as well. This is an imperative alongside the need for a fossil fuel phase out.
Thank you. Maite.
I think we need to remember the two advisory opinions delivered by the International Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and also the International Court of Justice. And both of them remind the governments that they have the obligation to protect environment and climate. And this is a legal obligation. I mean, in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, it is a jus cogens. That means it's really a peremptory norm in international law. So the states have the obligation on protect climate, protect nature. So they have the obligation of protecting the people. And this is very important. This is a call of action from the most important courts, two of the most important international courts. So governments must listen to that.
Thank you, Maite. Listen to the law and follow the law, right?
Yeah, follow the law.
So Diana.
So I kept on saying this throughout this whole time.
Repetition is always key when it comes to messaging, right? So
yeah,
go ahead.
So the express call to action is to just not always talk and keep talking about whether or not we need to act in order to decrease the temperature and to keep the temperature rise below 1.5 Celsius degrees. I think we're past that point. We should not be talking about this anymore. The call to action is to actually start talking about mobilizing the resources needed in order to get to that goal. We should be at that point already.
So Diana, just a follow-up on that one, because you are in the negotiations as the Minister of Environment from Romania. So do you see that there is really sharp and intended talk about roadmaps to phase out fossil fuel in the negotiations, or is there still a little bit of the fluffy talk going on?
The main problem that I see right now is that we have a lot of discussion where science is negated. So we're at the point where we're starting to talk again and again about the 1.5 Celsius degrees, and that is something that is kind of scares me. So we should not be at that point. We should be at the point of actually having the roadmap.
So there are actors in the negotiations that are with intent pulling it back and sort of questioning the where we're at. Is that what you're saying?
They're questioning the science. So basically, there are a lot of questions about the science behind it. So and that's okay in the science world, but there's a consensus in the science world.
So what more specifically are they questioning?
There are some things that I can say, and there are some things that I cannot answer.
And I'm a journalist, so I have to ask. All right. All right, Diana, I'm going to let you go. So Fernanda, you get the final say here in this panel.
Okay, so my final say is listen to the science, listen to the peoples, listen to the government of Brazil, the presidency of this COP. President Lula came and he said he expects 2 roadmaps out of this COP, one on phasing out fossil fuels or transitioning away from fossil fuels, the core cause of climate change, and another one on halting and reversing deforestation. So I urge countries to agree on those, because you have already agreed on that in 2023. So what we need now is implementation, and this is the COP of implementation. So a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels, a roadmap to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. Please.
Pretty please. Yes.
Pretty please, on behalf of civil society. I think that's what we are here fighting for and expecting countries to deliver.
Well, thank you, all of you, for sharing your insights and for really pushing this in your respective forums. You have different roles to play, but we're all in this together, right? So best of luck, Diana and Maite and Gavin and Fernanda, with your important work here at the COP. And I'm sure we'll meet each other again, maybe here in the studio or elsewhere, and in this venture that we're all on. So thank you again.
Thanks for bringing this very important discussion to the COP as well. I think it's very, very important. And we also want to see science being highlighted and acknowledged in this COP. This is key.
And that's why we have the Make Science Great Again campaign. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.